if we look back, there's a lot of things that we're probably not super excited to remember. And was it like that for you guys? Like your school, you had to stay home. Some of you were super excited about it. Some of you were not. COVID's not fun. Your parents are stressed out because of work. The whole year just kind of summed up in that failure. And I wanted to look at that tonight, diving in. We're going to be talking about Peter. And Peter is one of my favorite characters in the Bible because he reminds me a lot of myself. Not like all the good things about Peter, but the regular screw-up things about Peter, because I'm a screw-up most of the time. I wanted to look up the definition of a failure, and the Webster definition is an unsuccessful person. This is the noun. An unsuccessful person, enterprise, or thing. And then at the end it has, in quotations, loser. Loser. And when I look back on my life, especially in my Christian walk, like a lot of times it's easy to feel that way. But we were just singing, the story isn't over if the story isn't good. And that's such a fantastic thing to remember, and especially when we look at the things like Peter. Let's really talk about Peter. Like, what's Peter known for? Just y'all yell. Like, what do we know about Peter? What's some of the things he did? You guys know about Peter. Come on. He did what? He walked on for a little bit, right? He walked on water. He lobbed off the ear of some dude outside the Garden of Gethsemane. What did he do with Jesus? He denied Jesus 3 times. Peter's known for his failures. Like, those are like the big 3 things, I think. When I think about Peter, those are the 3 things that I remember. And they're not super great things. But again, just like that song said, if the story isn't over if the story isn't good. And so we're gonna look at some of these things. I guess we're gonna put up on I don't know how this stuff works. I guess it's gonna go up there. Yeah, sweet, it's gonna go up there. Let's look at Peter walking on water, Matthew 14, 22 through 33, if you guys have it. And I'm just going to read it off there because I've got the King James Version, and there's a lot of these and thous and stuff. So, immediately, he, talking about Jesus, made disciples get into the boat and go before him to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he goes up on a mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone. But the boat, full of disciples, by this time was a long way from the land, beaten by the waves, for the wind was against them. And in the 4th watch of the night, he came to them, walking on the sea. When the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. It's a ghost, they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke unto them, saying, Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid. Peter answered, Lord, if it's you, command me to come out onto the water. He said, come, talking about Jesus. So Peter got out of the boat and walked out of the water, or out onto the water, and came to Jesus. But when he saw the wind, he was afraid. He began to sink and cried out, Lord, save me. Jesus immediately reached out his hand, took hold of him, saying unto him, O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? When they came to the boat, the wind ceased. And those in the boat worshipped him, saying, Truly you are the Son of God. There's a whole lot more verses in there than I thought I'd put in, but that works. So what do we notice there? The disciples see Jesus coming out across the water. They're freaked out, as probably all of us would be. They're already freaking out. The wind, the waves, things aren't cool. They see someone walking out across the water, and the first thing they think is it's a ghost. I don't know if there's like some relation, like if that's like culturally, like I don't know if the first thing I would think when I see someone walking across water, like ghost. But who knows? I don't know anything about the culture back then. Jesus tells them, take courage and don't be afraid. Peter answers and begins to walk across the water toward Jesus, and he began to sink when he saw the wind and he saw the waves. Peter failed. O ye of little faith, why did you doubt? Second one. go to John 18, 1 through 11. When Jesus had spoken these words, he went out with the disciples across the brook Kidron, outside of the garden, which he and his disciples entered. Now Judas, who had betrayed him, also knew the place, for Jesus often met there with his disciples. So Judas, having procured a band of soldiers and some officers from the chief priests and the Pharisees, went there with lanterns and torches and weapons. Then Jesus, knowing all that would happen to him, came forward and said unto them, Whom do you seek? They answered him, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus said to them, I am he. Judas, who betrayed him, was standing with them. When Jesus said to them, I am he, they drew back and fell to the ground. So he asked them again, Who do you seek? They said, Jesus of Nazareth. Jesus answered, I told you that I am he, so if you seek me, let these men go. This was to fulfill the word that he had spoken. Of those whom you gave me, I have lost not one. Then Simon Peter, here he is again, having a sword, drew it out and strikes off the priest's ear, or the servant's ear, the priest's servant's ear. The servant's name was Malchus. So Jesus said to Peter, Put your sword into its sheath. Shall I not drink the cup that the Father has given me? So once again, Peter stands up, but Peter fails. So after praying, Jesus and his disciples walking across the Kidron Valley, like I just said, a group of soldiers shows up. Peter whips out a sword and cuts off a dude's ear. After he's been walking with Jesus this whole time, right? He knows, Jesus' teachings. He's very akin to what is expected of him, but whack, off with a guy's ear. Peter denies Jesus 3 times. Let's go to Matthew 26, 31 through 35. So we're kind of going back to the Last Supper. Jesus said to them, You will all fall away because of me this night, for it is written, I will strike the shepherd, and the sheep of the flock will be scattered. But after I am raised, I will go before you to Galilee. Peter answered him, again, Peter, star student, pupil. Though they all fall away because of you, I will never fall away. Jesus said to him, Truly I tell you, this very night before the rooster crows, you would deny me 3 times. Peter said to him, Even if I must die with you, I will not deny you. And all the disciples said the same. Skipping forward to Luke 22, 54 through 62. So back again, this is after the Kidron Valley, after he's already lobbed somebody's ear off. Then they seized him and led him away, talking about Jesus, bringing him into the high priest's house, and Peter was following at a distance. Here comes Peter. And when they had kindled a fire in the middle of the courtyard and sat down together, Peter sits down among them. Then a servant girl, seeing him as he sat in the light and looking closely at him, said, This man also was with him. But he denied it. Woman, I do not know him. And a little later, someone else sees him and says, You also are one of them. Peter says, Man, I am not. And after an interval of about an hour, still another insisted. They're very persistent. Certainly, this man also is with him, for he too is a Galilean. Peter says, Man, I do not know what you are talking about. And immediately, while he was still speaking, the rooster crowed. And I don't know if I've just read this account from the different Gospels. I don't know if I'm sure I have, but I kind of glossed over it. This last verse right here that we've got, or the last 2 verses, it's Luke. And Luke was known for taking careful detail, making sure that he included everything that happened. I don't think I've ever noticed these last 2 verses. And it really hit me hard. And the Lord turned and looked at Peter. And Peter remembered the saying of the Lord, how he had said to him before the rooster crows today, You will deny me 3 times. And he went out and wept bitterly. So Peter is a screw-up. Peter is, according to Webster anyway, an unsuccessful person. Every single one of these attempts, every single one of these times that we mentioned here, Peter failed. Peter messed up. Peter, who was one of the 12, Peter, who walked with Jesus daily, broke bread with the man, fails basically every time he's brought up in the Gospels. But the fantastic thing about it, guys, is just like we sang earlier, and how I mentioned earlier, that the story isn't over if the story isn't good. The story didn't end on the Sea of Galilee when Peter had stepped out in the water and he sank. The story doesn't end with Peter drowning. Jesus reaches in and saves him. He chastises him, sure. He says, hey man, what's up with that? You know me. You should have had faith in me. But he was there. He reached in and saved him. Outside the garden, when he lobs the guy's ear off, again, Jesus chastises him. But Peter was the one to step up. He wanted to defend his Lord. He wanted to defend his Savior. When Jesus tells Peter that he's going to deny him 3 times, sitting at the Last Supper, after Jesus has just told him that he's going to be taken away, that he's going to be crucified, and not only that, you're going to pretend like you never knew me. Peter's the first one to step up and say, Lord, listen, not me. And it just reminds me so much of us, of our Christian walk every day. Romans 3:23 tells us that all have sinned, all will sin. We're all going to screw up. We're all going to fall short of the glory of God. All of us. And it's just such a helpful reminder to me that someone like Peter, who is literally there with Jesus, living with him and learning from him and doing life with him, like you guys say, that's a phrase that you guys have adopted. I haven't been out of high school very long. This is off topic, but we're going to talk about it. I haven't been out of high school very long, but I feel like you guys have rewritten the English language. There's so much stuff that I don't get anymore. Hanging out, especially, I didn't notice it, I don't think, until I started hanging out with the youth group. But you guys do and say some very interesting things. That and the way you guys wear your hats. We talk about this all the time. I see one right now. Yeah, right on top of your head. That does not it's not aerodynamic. You can't move your head very fast. I don't get it. I don't understand it. I never will. We did weird stuff too, but I don't that one's just so far out in left field. I'm throwing stuff. But what I'm trying to say, and this is super scattered and all over the place, you guys can't be afraid to fail. I was scared to death. I'm still scared to death. I'm scared right now. I'm sure you can tell it. I don't public speak. I don't do well in front of crowds. But Peter wasn't afraid to fail. And I think that's why I respect him so much, I guess, is because I look at Peter and he was so willing to put himself out there. He was the first one to raise his hand on the boat. When number one, they're all afraid they're going to drown because the wind and waves are bad. But now they see some dude walking across the water, they think it's a ghost. But once Jesus talks to him, he's the first one to raise his hand. He's the first one to say, listen, Jesus, if that's you, call to me. I'll walk across the water. And he did. And he failed, but he wasn't afraid of failing. He spoke up at the table when Jesus told him that he was going to betray him. He was the first one. And all the other disciples, it did say there at the end, all the other disciples were like, yeah, Lord, me too. I'm not going to. But Peter was the first one to stick his neck out. And I think it's because, what do we know about Peter before? Before he was a disciple, he was what? A fisherman. They used nets back then, not fishing rods. But how many of you guys fish? I was about to say, every one of the 7th graders fish. We talk about it all the time. What happens when you're fishing and you're not catching fish? You move to a different spot, right? You change your lures. You get used to failure. And what we realize when we're looking at this is that as a Christian, you can't be afraid to fail because we're guaranteed that we're going to fail. Romans 3:23, we're all going to fail. We're all going to fall short of the glory of God. But that's kind of the beauty of it, is that we're not meant to be perfect, because we already serve someone who is perfect. That we're just kind of here to do the best that we can. I want to look at one more verse. I think we got it. Yeah, Luke 24. Returning from the tomb. This is after the crucifixion. This is after the burial. This is after Mary has went to the tomb and realized it was empty. And this is who it's talking about. Returning from the tomb, they told these things to the 11 and to all the rest. It was Mary Magdalene and Joanna and Mary the mother of James and the other woman with them who told these things to the apostles. But these words seemed to them an idle tale, and they did not believe them. But Peter, again, rose, and he ran to the tomb. He stoops and looks in and saw the linen clothes by themselves. And he went home marveling at what had happened. Again, guys, Peter's the first one. And he hops up, he's sitting at the table, everyone's like, nah, that's ridiculous. We saw Jesus die. We saw him wrap him up. I know what he said. I know he said he was going to rise. It's been 3 days, though. That's ridiculous. Peter's the first one up. And he hits the ground running. After that scene in the courtyard where Jesus turned and looked at him after Peter had denied him 3 times. Peter's the first one up, and he goes running back to his Lord. Sam told me to go 15 to 30 minutes. I'm pretty sure it's been like 8. Because I bleed at the mouth when I get up here. But that's just something that I think we need to really think about. I was scared to death. Again, not a public speaker. Because I knew that Sam was going to ask me to do something like this one day. Even like my wife and I, she's been coming here her whole life. Jenna Eckstein, that's my wife. I married her. We're having a kid in June. We're super excited. Yeah. Things are looking. 2020 was terrible, but there were some really super cool things that came out of 2022. So 2022, not 2020. We're not there yet. But there's a part of me that was so afraid to fail that I was willing to come to church every Sunday morning and kind of sit like 3 or 4 rows back. Like, we didn't sit in the back row, but we sat just far enough back that people didn't notice us. We were sneaky like that. And like, as soon as the service would be over, we'd jump up and hit that door. And we'd go eat at El Centinela or La Paria. And it kind of got into just this habit of us coming to church and being poured into, but we both knew that we needed to be given something back. And here's the shameful thing, guys. Like, Jenna had to be my Peter. And what I mean by that was she was the one that said, hey, I'm going to go talk to Brian. I'm going to go see where we need to be plugged in at. And as soon as she said that, I was like, oh, or not as soon as she did, but on the outside, I'm like, yeah, great, babe. Sounds good. Let's see what he says. Hopefully he's like, no, dude, we need you in the 3rd row. You're doing great. But no, he's like, hey, you know what? You should talk to Sam. And I love working with you guys. I really have. Middle schoolers are fantastic. It's been fun. I remember middle school. Middle school was weird. We were kind of laughing on the way over here because when I got home from work this afternoon, I was like, hey, I'm going to go jump in the shower real quick. I want you to lay me out some clothes that look like youth pastor clothes. And so when I get out of the shower, she has this laid out, and I realize that I don't have any clothes that look like youth pastor clothes because I dress like an old man most of the time. And to make matters worse, I, without thinking, reached under the sink and put on this cologne that my dad gave me like 15 years ago. And it's like old man cologne. It smells just like my grandfather, and I smell like my grandpa right now. So I'm so far off from middle school, but it's been so cool getting involved with these guys and seeing what it is they're going through and being able to plug in with their lives. And all that being said, if I had stayed in the third row, if my wife, thankfully she was the one to get up and go and say, hey, let's go do this. Let's get plugged in. If she hadn't done that, I never would have met you guys. I never would have been up here. I won't be up here right now with really sweaty hands, babbling on incoherently. But when I started looking at Peter, the thing that stood out to me the most wasn't necessarily the failure that he's kind of known for. And he shouldn't be known for that. But it is the things that come to mind when you think about Peter. But it's the fact that he was so willing to stick his neck out when others weren't. Talking about middle school, I guess this was technically high school. I told my middle school guys this story, but when I think about my life and some of my biggest failures, the one that stands out to me the most happened my freshman year of high school. And when you're in high school, like, the thing that matters to you the most, whether you realize it or not, some of you guys may just be like, may have been on a different spiritual level than I was in 2009, but I wanted to blend in with the crowd. I wanted to be like the cool kid, I wasn't trying to like bring too much attention to myself because I was a freshman and I weighed 128 pounds soaking wet and just wanted to kind of get in, make some friends, get on with my life, put it behind me. I was going to church. I was a Christian. I was saved and baptized when I was 7 years old, grew up in church, know all this stuff, know how to live my life. But I was walking across the cafeteria one day. I'm going to Jackson County High School. Are there any Jackson County guys in here? There's a Jackson County girl in here. Sweet. Yeah. Go Panthers. Jake's a Jackson County guy. Hey, dude. Braylon. Anyway, some alumni. Anyway, back in the day, it was super cool to me because when you got to high school, you could order a glass of tea for like 50 extra cents. I thought that was the coolest thing ever. And I get my tray and I go around to the tea counter and I'm filling up with my sweet tea. And I turn around and look. We'd been in school for probably 2 months now. I guess it's like November, late October, something like that. And I turn and look, and here's my friends. I sit in a little corner booth thing. And I don't know if it's still this way, but like back then there was this unwritten rule that you didn't sit in the middle. Like for whatever reason, you wanted to sit on the outside edge of the cafeteria. And so I turn and look, and there's this dude that I'd noticed before, but I didn't know his name. He was older than me. And you could just kind of tell by the way that he was dressed that he probably didn't come from a family that had a lot of money. And I never really saw him with a lot of people, so I didn't know if he had friends. But at this particular time, he was sitting by himself. And he's crying his eyes out. Kind of a bigger guy. He's got his head down. But you can tell he's crying just because of his shoulders popping up and down. And when you look up, sure enough, he's got tears streaming down his face. And in that moment, everything in me screamed, hey, go at least check on this guy. You don't know his name. Introduce yourself. Hey, man, is there anything I can pray for you about? Like, what's going on? Do you just need to talk? Do we need to go get a count? Like, what's going on, man? Don't know. To this day, I have no idea because I failed. Because I looked at him and then looked at my friends and I said, my reputation is more important to me right now than doing what I know I'm called to do, than serving. And so I took my tray and I turned away from him and pretend I didn't see him. And I sat down with my friends and I ate my lunch and I moved on with my life. And when I look back on my walk with Christ, when I look back at high school, when I look back at middle school, that's one of the things that stands out to me the most. Because it was a time that I failed so miserably. And I think That's why I relate to Peter so much. Probably because I wish I was a little bit more like him. You know, I was so scared of failure. I was so scared of putting myself out there. And for what? I mean, you know, you guys are in high school right now, and I'm sure it seems super important, but 10, 20 years down the road, you know, you're going to be just like me, sitting here wishing that you had went and done something like that instead of hanging on to this, you know, weird idea that you've got about yourself. And I'm not, like I said, you guys may be on like a totally different spiritual plane than me back then, but I was not. But the fantastic thing about Peter is that he was so willing and not afraid to stick his neck out. And I think that's how we need to be as Christians. We need to be looking for opportunities to serve. We need to be looking for opportunities to pour into other people. We can't be afraid of screwing up because we're going to screw up. It's guaranteed that we're going to screw up. But that's fine because we serve somebody who never screws up. You know, I think once we come to terms with the fact that we're not perfect, that our righteousness is as filthy rags, that no matter what you do, you're not going to be perfect, that you're not going to walk on water every time. You know, that you're not going to be able to keep your sword in its scabbard. You know, that you are not going to deny Jesus. Sometimes you're going to do those things, and that's okay. When we look back on the Webster definition of failure, and I'm going to go ahead and wrap this up if the band wants to come back up, because I will literally talk all night if I don't do something. If we look at the Webster definition of failure, it's an unsuccessful person, enterprise, or thing, loser. But in our Christian walk, I think the only time that you fail, or the only time that you're a failure, the only time that you're a loser, is when you stop striving to be more like Jesus every day. And Peter did try. He tried to walk on water. You know, he tried to stand up for his faith. He failed, but all of us are going to fail. We can't be afraid of failure. And I know I've said that 37 times. I was so scared that I was going to fail tonight. I did not want to do this. I was really scared that I was going to get up here and say something stupid. And I might have, but it doesn't matter, you know. Because I serve a God that's never going to fail. We sang that earlier too. This is tough. I have a lot of respect for Sam and for Brian and for everybody that gets up and does this every day. I feel like I didn't have, it's like, you know, you're supposed to have a beginning, a middle, and an end. I feel like I just had a middle, but that's okay. There's no really good way to wrap this up other than, again, to reiterate the fact that we're all going to fail. That you can't be scared to stick your neck out. That you've got to at least make the effort. Try. Peter tried. Peter failed, but Peter tried. But he always had Jesus to run back to. That's the gist of it. I could have just summed that up in, a sentence instead of just babbling, and I'm babbling again. So I'm going to pray, and we're going to end this, and I'm going to let them sing, and I'm going to sit down. But, again, do not be afraid. I hate the fact that my wife had to jab us into this because this has been such a fantastic experience, and you guys have welcomed us with open arms. And I'm so thankful for the blessing that this has been. And I'm going to look back on tonight and be like, wow, I mean, it's nothing to be afraid. Like, if Sam ever asked one of you guys to get up here and do this, it's not, it's whatever. You might look dumb. You might feel dumb. I feel dumb. Your hands are going to sweat. It's okay. Let's pray.